Can everyone see that okay? Yeah, excellent. Right. Okay, so I'm going to try and go quite quickly through this because I've got a lot of slides because there's a lot of information. But so my name's Duncan Jones, and Bex has helped me with the sequence data on these slides. So I run Marine Discovery, lots of you probably know that. And so this really is an overview of the data we've collated from the Southwest for 2024. So it's between January 2024 and December 2024. And there's a few different data sets, and I'm going to explain those and the differences. And then it becomes a little bit of a repetitive, hopefully not death by bar chart. We'll see what people we'll get on. Anyway, here we go. Right. So the first
Duncan,
thing
just to say, at the moment I've got it in like presenter mode, so I'm seeing your like PowerPoint as it's not full screen, but you can keep it like that if you like.
I am seeing full screen. Hang on,
right.
Hang on a minute. Right. Hang on.
It might be to do with, sometimes it's to do with which screen you've shared. If you've got
yeah,
two
let me
screens.
stop sharing and reshare. Hang on, sorry.
I've done that before.
I'll start the PowerPoint again.
So much easier when we all just sat in a room.
Absolutely. Right. This could be a problem. Is it done it now?
I've still got your PowerPoint view, but we can still see the slide clearly. So if you're not too worried, then you could just.
I'll have to just do that. Hang on, I'll just make it as big as possible. Sorry about this, everybody. Right, you can see my PowerPoint. Okay, we'll have to just go through like this. Okay. Oh my. Oops. Right. Okay, so yeah, this slide really this is a new data set for this year. It's the from the Peltic cruises. What the Peltic cruise is it's a research cruise run by CFAS, and they're investigating pelagic fish stocks, and they also make plankton and oceanographic do plankton oceanographic sampling, and they have seabird and marine mammal observers on board. And the green lines on the map show their transects, and the white blobs on this one actually show where they've seen common dolphins. So I'm going to talk about their data set. When we're with their data set, what you have to remember is it happens once a year in October, and they go across these green transect lines once, regardless of what the weather is. So you'll see big fluctuations in what they see across their data. Second data set, we've been using this for a few years now, is the one from Orca, from organization Cetaceans. And this map just shows their survey coverage. You can see on the ferry routes, they have a lot more coverage than in other areas, but they actually have quite good coverage across the whole Southwest region, which is, so it's a really important data set for Southwest marine ecosystems. This year, they've had extra ferry routes coming out of the channel, and you can see that in their data this year because they've got extra sightings. Also, they've got extra effort in areas where there's more cetaceans, so it shows more cetaceans per effort, if you like. And then the third data set is the Sequest Southwest stuff, but it's the data that's collected on surveys where they record effort as well. So we do look at the ad hoc sightings in the report, and we talk about them in this presentation when I'm talking about Sequest Southwest. And I just realized I got a spelling mistake. Do you know what? I can actually change that because I'm not in presenting mode. There we go. That's a bonus. Anyway, so yeah, so this is the data on all the plots. It's the effort corrected stuff. And then there's my marine discovery data in there as well. And when we look at these different data sets, we're not directly comparing between them. What we're comparing between them is trends. Because the data is collected in different ways and over different spatial areas, you can't really combine them to compare them directly. So when we're looking at them, it's putting the graphs next to each other and looking at how the trends in the different data sets are changing. The other thing to bear in mind as well when we're looking at the graphs is the scales change. So for example, we come across a lot more common dolphins per amount of effort or amount of time searching than we might minke whales. And so I'll try and point that out as the scales go. So I'm going to just start by looking at harbour porpoises. not often you get a photo of one breaching like this, but we saw quite a lot of breaching this year, and porpoises are pretty active around the southwest and have big numbers. And so if we look at the different data sets, on each of the slides of these, I've kept the different graphs from the different data sets in the same place. So in the top left here, this is the Sequest data, and you can see this starts at 2010 to 2024. So it built to a real peak in 2018, and then things seem to have calmed down since then. So numbers in records in 2024, and these are percentage of surveys with sightings. But they're still in 2024, although the records have say dropped since 2018, they're still there. And 2018 is a really interesting year because in my marine discovery data, we've got a really high spike in 2018. And when I've investigated that further within my own data, I've realized that year we had a lot of calmer weather in the autumn and a lot of rougher weather in May and June. And in a minute, when you look at the seasonalities, you'll see May and June is typically a time when there aren't many porpoises around. So you're not going to get many sightings per your amount of effort in May and June, compared to the late summer and autumn where there are lots of sightings. And I think that weather pattern has skewed the data for 2018 in our two inshore data sets, which is quite interesting. But in the marine discovery data set, generally the trend is an increase in porpoise sightings per effort. Peltic cruises in the bottom left here, like I said, they can show real changes between years. And from this, it looks like there's a real decrease in their porpoise sightings. And actually, there's a decrease in many of their sightings across their surveys. But possibly that's because they're dealing with rougher weather and detection rates are much harder, and it's much harder to detect things when it's rougher. And then in the bottom right, we've got the orca data set, which definitely shows a trending down of sightings for harbour porpoises. Although you'll notice in all of their data sets, there's this little spike in 2024. It's not a massive spike in the porpoise data set. And I think this is because they're the survey routes. We look at trends across years. So I've done a trends plot again, which has the marine discovery data, Sequest Southwest, and the orca data. Haven't got enough information to do that with the Peltic cruises. But in our marine discovery data, we always see this. When we first start, we have higher sightings rates, then it drops down through April, May, and June. And then we build to this real peak in the autumn. The Sequest data shows something similar, and you can see actually though in the months when we're not out in marine discovery, there's still fairly high sightings rate for Sequest, but their peak is slightly later than ours, which is interesting. And their data is coming from all over Cornwall, whereas ours is very focused. And then the orca data shows peaks outside of that time, and they're much further offshore, and they have survey routes that go a lot further offshore. So there could be this inshore offshore movement of porpoises that the data is showing. We don't really know. And what's really interesting with all this data is when I'm making this report and this slideshow, I don't have loads of time, but I have an amount of time. And then for every question you want to ask the data, it is like another few hours of crunching data to find the answer. And also I have limited time. I know I'm probably going to go over my time now because I've got so much to get through. So I'll try and speed up a bit now. I've explained some of that. So with common dolphins, both the Sequest data and the marine discovery data really show, certainly since 2015, 2016, there's been this real leap in common dolphin sightings, and you can really notice it. The orca data shows it. Unfortunately, the 2024 data has really squashed the whole graph. So I probably maybe should use a different scale there. But again, there's been this jump in sightings. They've had loads more effort actually in the channel this year, which then fits with our increasing in data sightings as well. 2017 was a real bumpy year. And again, that hides the trend a little bit in our graph. The common dolphin observations on the Peltic cruises, as I said before, they can be very up and down, but actually they've had almost a downward trend. They're much more offshore as well, so that might explain that, but it could be explained again by the temporal limitations of the survey. The seasonality. So this is really interesting for me. So these seasonality graphs it's sightings per effort, but then it's as a percentage of the whole year's sightings. So all of the sightings per effort for each month is added up to a total, and that's 100%. And it's broken down by months. So it's trying to effort rate, but then show a percentage difference through the year so that all the data sets were comparable or be plotted on the same chart. And I would have said our peak is in July, but when you do it like that, our peak appears like it's in June, and that's probably because we have a lot less survey effort in June, but still see a lot of stuff. The Wildlife Trust data peaks a bit later than ours, and then what we see with the orchid data is it just builds through to the end of the through to autumn. The other thing that I saw when I was looking in the Peltic survey reports, they were talking about a reduction in the pod sizes of common dolphins that they were seeing. So this is taken from their report, and you can see this between 2021 and 2023. So down this side, you've got pod sizes with 300 being the largest pod size that they've created. And these are the counts of these different pod sizes they recorded. And they showed a decrease. So I looked in my marine discovery data, and the bars on this show our mean pod size per year. But then interestingly, this line plot is percentage of our sightings with over 50 dolphins. And you can see that that's really decreased. So we do seem to be seeing this downward trend in pod sizes in these two data sets, and also in the orca data set as well. So we've got this decreasing trend. I haven't had chance to do the percentage of their sightings of pods greater than 50, which would be interesting to plot as well to see. But it's an interesting thing to think about. So we seem to have had this mass influx of common dolphins, but potentially their pod sizes are getting smaller, so they're breaking down into smaller pods, or we're not getting these really large feeding aggregations. However, having said that, the Wildlife Trust data shows maybe something different. They may be showing more of an upward trend in pod sizing. These are the ad hoc sightings. These are from just people submitting sightings data. It'd be really interesting to investigate these two where it's where the pod size is of 1,000, which just seems a very large pod size. And then this is from Sequest surveys. You'll notice the scale has changed. So on the Sequest surveys, they're either recording much smaller pod sizes or they're more conservative with their pod size efforts, maybe. But still, there's less of this trend of increasing, but it does seem that there's an increase. And Baxter give me a lot of other plots for this, but which investigate it further, but there's not really time to talk about that in too much more detail. It's an interesting thing to think about, and maybe we need to investigate that further. This possibility that common dolphin pod sizes are decreasing. With bottlenose dolphins, so we didn't actually see any this year, but typically we do see them. And the Wildlife Trust data, the Sequest survey data seems to show a downward trend. And interestingly, this downward point occurs not long after the massive upward spike in common dolphins, which is interesting. The Peltic cruises, again, is very up and down. And then the orca data is fairly stable. And then we've got this massive spike in 2024. But like I said, they've had lots more effort in the channel. With bottlenoses, it's also really interesting to consider that we have the inshore ecotypes, the ones that stay very close to the coast, and the offshores, which are more pelagic and seem to behave more like common dolphins. And we know the two types don't really mix. And the south coast pod typically spends a lot more time further east up the channel now, or that's what the photo identification is suggesting, although they are around the Cornish coast at the moment, which is really interesting. And actually, if we look at the trends, both in the marine discovery data and the Sequest data, the highest percentage of our sightings occur at either end of the year or either end of our season. So that's quite interesting to look at. And then with the orca data, it's almost the opposite. They have the peaks in the summer, but we think they're probably recording a lot more offshore bottlenoses because they're a lot further offshore. Risso's dolphins. So it's a much more up and down picture with Risso's. You seem to have really good years and less good years. However, more consistently, we're getting good years every year. And also since 2015, there has been in many of the data sets this increase. It's like a step change in sightings rates, if you like. And we know they're cephalopod feeders, so cuttlefish and squid, and we know that cuttlefish and squid and octopus potentially do better in warmer conditions. They lay more smaller eggs, certainly cuttlefish do. And also the cuttlefish life cycle speeds up. So typically in colder water further north, cuttlefish might spawn every 2 years, and their life cycle is around 2 years. But when it gets warmer, their life cycle can speed up to to be almost a year, so you can get good cuttlefish years each year. So in the data, I would have said that this past year should have been not such a great year, but it was actually interesting. We had a reasonable amount of sightings still in all of the data sets. And it looked next year, in theory, if the theory is right, is correct, should be a real bumper year. Within our data, the actually, if we statistically analyze the sightings rate across the year within our data, it peaks in July, but it really closely matches cuttlefish spawning. And from the cuttlefish research, Josh is going to talk about it later actually a lot, but we're starting to think that these juvenile mum and calf and mum and juvenile pods focus on feeding on the cuttlefish around the eelgrass beds because it's easy feeding. The mother hasn't got to dive deep, she hasn't got to leave her calf for a long time at the surface. And we think that's why they're following this pattern. The Sequest data, again, peaks a bit later in the summer, but then that's coming from all around the Cornish coast, and mine is very Mounts Bay focused. So my sightings rates will focus around maybe one particular influx of cuttlefish, whereas the Sequest might focus around many, and they're also feeding on other things as well, squid and octopus. And the orca shows this peak towards the end. Josh will talk more about that, but the orca also have some sighting spots further offshore, which are really interesting. But yeah, Josh is going to talk about cuttlefish. So I'll speed on to the whales. And so minkies, we've definitely seen again this increase in minkie sightings, particularly since 2015. For us, 2017 and I talked about 2018 and why we've got that spike there, but 2017 was a really interesting year for us as well. But yeah, we've had this upward trend. The trend within the orca data has been more stable, but again, they're covering much wider area. And then the Peltic cruise, certainly they had a lot more sightings earlier and then dropped away. But I think some of their earlier cruises may have had better sea states and better sea conditions. And if we look at the seasonality with Risso's dolphins, this is, I'll also have gone back a slide, something like that. Guys, there we go. Minke whales, they really do seem to peak in the summer and autumn months, particularly in my data and in the Sequest Southwest data. Orca shows this similar trend where they're building in numbers to October, and then it seems to drop off the charts. Maybe because they have less effort beyond that time as well. And then if we look at fin whales, it's actually a very similar pattern in the sightings are increasing of them, certainly in our inshore data sets and in the orca data set as well. The Peltic cruise, they had a really good year for sightings in 2017, and since then they haven't had that repeated. But the sightings are even more clustered within that peak summer month. There's peak summer months, although there's this spike in the Sequest data in December as well. Humpbacks. So obviously we've had lots of humpbacks sighted off Newquay this year, but that's obviously in next year's data. And also they're mostly ad hoc sightings. And when you get humpbacks along the coast, lots of people come out to see them, and you get lots of sightings coming in, but without the effort, you can't tell if that's for the same animal or not. This is a photo taken by Terry Kahn of Minstrel, one of the newly identified or newly catalogued whales. But yeah, so in the Sequest data, there's been this real increase in sightings of humpbacks since 2020. Within our data, we've always seen them, although most of our sightings are actually summer sightings of them. Although in 2022 and 2024, the sightings we've had there have been in March and April, so not so the end of this winter period. But these are all summer ones when you more likely expect to see humpbacks. And in the orca data, in their effort data, they've only really got them from 2024. Other species, lovely pilot whale photo at the top there. So within the orca survey, sorry, the charts are in different order here. They're obviously seeing a lot more pilot whales, although the scale, they're not seeing loads of them, but they see them more consistently than everyone else because they're further offshore. Striped dolphins are starting to appear in the orca data. And then in the Peltic cruises, we've got white-beaked dolphins showing up, although not for the last few years. And we know we've probably got this small population down here that some years, if they come across them, they'll record them. And if they don't, then we can see them. Onto stranding. So this is data directly from Anthea, the strandings data officer, from her presentation. So this is on the left. This is this year's strandings numbers, and you can see common dolphins and hard porpoises are always the most consistently stranded animals. I think we're starting to see more Risso's dolphins stranding, and that's likely to have got more around. And then you can see common dolphins make up this big chunk of the plots at the moment of the bars, the strandings compared to all other species, and the porpoises of this brown patch and then other species mixing above. But so strandings rates for the southwest are still high, and the southwest has, I think, the highest strandings rate in the country, and certainly the highest bycatch rate in the country. Cetacean strandings by month, there was a real spike in 2024 in March. So strandings typically are higher, seem to be higher through the winter months into spring, and then decrease, which is interesting because this is when we appear to have more cetaceans around. So there's something going on during this period. Be interesting to investigate that and to look at how causes of strandings and how causes of stranding might change over a year. So very quickly, what can we conclude from this? So common dolphin rates remain high, as do stranding rates of common dolphins. Common dolphin pod sizes have decreased in 3 of our data sets. They have increased in 1 or slightly increased in 1. That's an interesting thing to look at, and it's interesting to understand why that might be driving that. We know that in Ireland, they're having more common dolphins strand in poor body condition, which is interesting. Typically, harbour porpoises are increasing in some data sets, but not in all of them. There's a discussion at the moment, we're considering whether there's a habitat displacement, so common dolphins taking over from harbour porpoises. And we've certainly seen common dolphins bullying harbour porpoises and stealing, like harbour porpoises shoaling, herding up and shoaling fish, and common dolphins coming in and stealing that shoal. So is it pushing them further from the coast, so they're not being as consistently recorded in sequest surveys off the coast? We don't know that. Would require a lot more research. Risso's dolphin numbers seem to be increasing. Josh is going to talk about that. And baleen whale sightings are definitely increasing, and close to the coast, they really peak inshore in the summer and autumn. Humpback whales continue to spend winters feeding off the southwest. We know a number of the ones are juveniles, but there are also adults. And it's not just a phenomenon around Cornwall. It's recorded around Scotland, Norway, and in Iceland. There's definitely something going on there, which is interesting to consider. And I just wanted, I know I've probably gone over my time, to talk about, this is a very recent study out of UCL, where they're looking at changes in how the Atlantic circulation is changing. And they've been comparing it to the last 10,000 years. And it's in the 20th century, the amount that the subpolar gyre, which is basically sits in here, so you've got the North Atlantic current, and then these are the cold water currents. They create this gyre in here, this subpolar gyre, and we can use the index of that, and it's been matched and used to predict salmon distribution, all kinds of different things. But what they've been doing is looking at core samples and looking at the makeup of biological communities, and what they're finding is that we're having subtropical conditions pushing further and further and further north, and the ocean currents, so the thermohaline circulation within the Atlantic is both partly a product of weather, but it can also influence climate. And so they're saying that the changes in the 20th century are well outside the parameters of normal fluctuation in the subpolar gyre index since the last ice age. So there's unprecedented changes in the last decade, in the 20th century compared to the last 10,000 years. So it's a really interesting study linked to, it's in Geophysical Research Letters, but it could be an explanation for why we're seeing a change in the plankton structure that we get, and there's a lot of evidence that we're switching to a subtropical plankton structure, and that will be affecting fish distributions, and then that's what's driving these changes potentially in cetacean distribution. Anyway, that again all requires loads more research and looking into and connecting the different things. But finally, just thank you very much for listening, and sorry for the hitches at the start of the webinar. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Duncan. I think if it's okay for everyone, we'll save questions until the end of this section at least. So we'll move on and do Dan's presentation, I think, next on humpbacks, and then move to Josh, if that's okay. So I'm going to share Dan's presentation for him. Hopefully you're there somewhere, Dan.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hooray. Yes, that's great. Okay, I'll share my screen and bring up the...
Great, thank you, Max.
Well, that was going well. Now my computer's glitching. Right, here we go. Hopefully, I won't be able to see the chat now. Somebody else might need to monitor that one for me. But just like Duncan's, I am having problem. Oh, there we go. Is that better? Should be full screen.
Yeah, that looks okay to me here.
Okay. All right. Shout when you want me to advance. I can't even mute myself, so I apologise, everybody. I'll try and keep quiet.
Okay, great. Thank you, Max. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for making it along tonight. Good to see a number of you here again. Tonight we're going to present really just all the sightings, information and data that we've collected during 2024 on the humpback whales that have been around southwest England. So we run a identification catalogue for these animals covering the southwest of the UK, which I do as a volunteer for Sequest Southwest as part of Cornwall Wildlife Trust. So if we jump onto the next slide, Bex, we'll just give a few stats on that catalogue itself. So as Duncan mentioned in his talk just now, we had this real uptick from 2020 onwards in humpback whale sightings in this region. The reasons are still a little bit unclear, but it might be a combination of the population recovering from the days of whaling to the effects of climate change altering their distribution and their prey distribution potentially. And maybe a few other factors as well. So it's a little bit of a mixed and unclear picture at the moment why we've suddenly started to get these whales here. But this has given rise to the creation of a humpback whale identification catalogue for this region of the country, which we began in 2021 after we started to get re-identifications of individuals. So as I say, this is run voluntarily as part of Sequest Southwest as Cornwall Wildlife Trust. Our catalogue currently has 31 animals. The majority of them have been identified since 2021 as animals that have shown up in this area since then, but we have researched and found a smaller number of historical records going back as early as 2008, where we have been able to collect identification images of animals that we've been able to include in this as well. Between those 31 animals, we have over 170 confirmed sightings, most of those, of course, for southwest England, southwest UK area, but there are some sightings from other parts of the world as well, which we'll mention a little bit more of later on. And these are done by mainly receiving photos and videos sent in by Sequest Southwest surveyors. So I think there's a couple of you at least on here tonight who have contributed to that on a number of occasions over the last few years, which is fantastic. And increasingly, especially this year, with the very prolific whale at Watergate Bay, we've had a number of more photos that have been contributed by members of the public, often sought out by seeing posts on social media and requests being asked for them to be sent in, which people are really obliging to do, which is fantastic, and we can include those records as well. So if we move on another slide, please, Bex. When it comes to carrying out an identification on these animals, you can use other body parts. Typically, people think that you can only do it by using the underside of the tail, but that's not true. You can use the dorsal fin, you can use markings on the body, and even the pectoral fins and other parts as well. So it's not just confined to tail fluke photos. And that's really important because that's quite a common misconception, and it might be limiting the number of photos that we're receiving, because people might think if they haven't got tail fluke photos, there's no point bothering to send anything in. So if anyone out there does have humpback whale photos that are good quality and you can see markings and scars on the body, doesn't just have to be on the tail flukes, then please, please, please do send them in so we can use them. That would be fantastic. But we're just going to demonstrate what that process looks like now of carrying out an identification. So Bex, if you just click on a few actions, there should be a few little circles pop up on the screen here. And this will hopefully show you where there's a few markings that match up on the tail to start with. So you can see the same colour rings around different marks on the tail there match up between the top and the bottom photos. So we've got a number of markings on this one, which is great. So we've got 6 different ones. That's really good to confirm an ID. But we can also use markings on the side of the animal's body as well. So in those lower left photos too, we've got 3 or 4 markings, I think, here, where we can match that animal from other body parts. So this is just a demonstration of what that process looks like. But this one here is a whale that we're going to meet properly in a moment, who's really well known as pi, because hopefully, as you can see, it has the mathematical symbol on the right-hand side of its body, right below the dorsal fin. If we move on to the next slide, please, Bex. So pi is the first animal in our catalogue. It was first identified in August of 2019 in Mounts Bay, where people such as Duncan and Rupert Kirkwood were able to get some really amazing photos of this animal lunge feeding in the bay one afternoon. It's the animal that has since then been identified in Ireland in August and October of 2020. And then also in Scotland in August of 2022 off the Isle of Lewis. So this animal does seem to be around the UK at different sort of points in the year, because pretty much since 2020, it's been present in the Isles of Scilly between December and February, except in the winter of 2021 and 22. For some reason, it didn't show up. But every other winter, this animal has been here, and that's no exception for our most recent one. So pi this season spent winter in the Isles of Scilly once again, has never returned to Cornwall that we know of. Of course, it might very well have, but has never been photographed and proven. But this animal really does seem to like the Isles of Scilly during the winter months. But what was really interesting in 2024 was we had a one-off sighting of pi at the Isles of Scilly in October as well. So whether it was passing through on its way up or down from Ireland or to somewhere else, we're not quite sure. Maybe it's just been hanging around in the Celtic Sea for that entire period. We really don't know, and this is where having more data and more photos to do identifications from is really valuable, because we can build up a much bigger picture and a much better picture of animal movements by having more of this data included as well. So that's pi. He or she is our most regular visitor to the southwest. It's the only animal that's been re-identified in this region up until this year. So we'll get onto that in just a moment. But if we move on a slide again, please, Bex. We'll next meet Ivy. Now, Ivy was first identified in St Ives Bay in December of 2023, and we then had multiple confirmed identifications all the way through until the very end of March in 2024. So at the moment, as far as we're aware from the data that's available to us, this is the longest known stay of any individual animal in the catalogue so far. So this animal was consistently here for pretty much 4 months continuously. So that's the longest time one has been known to stay in our waters for. So during that stay, it was recorded regularly between Newquay Bay and just up as far as Trevose Head, down in St Ives Bay, and then towards the end in March, it moved around to the south coast to Mounts Bay, where we had a number of sightings, particularly off Porthleven. But then our last sighting of this animal, unfortunately, was the one that Duncan referred to earlier. It actually became entangled in some fishing gear in Mounts Bay near Newlyn, and ended up having to be rescued by the RNLI. We didn't see this animal again. That was the last confirmed sighting we had of it, and we hope the animal got away okay. So it would be really lovely, again through photo ID, if we can confirm this animal survived its entanglement incident here. Now, the other really interesting thing about this particular whale is that we can see in the middle photos here, this is a comparison, the left and the right. So the left photo was taken in December, and the photo on the right was taken in January. So they're about a month apart, and we're a little bit concerned about the reason these whales are turning up here is because they're not finding enough food. And certainly the whale photo on the left looks like it's very underweight. whereas the photo on the right appears to show that its nutritional condition may have improved. So that might be a little bit of supporting evidence for that theory. Next slide, please, Bex. The next animal here is the really exciting one. So this is our first re-identification of a humpback whale in the Cornish side. So we've got Pye over in the Isles of Scilly, who's never been resighted in Cornwall, but tends to hang around over there. Minstrel was first identified in December 2023 in Newquay Bay. We had multiple sightings in similar locations to Ivy, but we never actually confirmed them in the same place at the same time. But it's highly likely these two animals had quite a bit of contact during this time and made a similar movement in March and was seen off Porthleven and in Mounts Bay during that month as well, before leaving ahead of Ivy. Very recently, so this is spoilers for next year's webinar and report, but we're just leaning into 2025 data here. We very recently were able to confirm that Minstrel was off Newquay during February. So this is really exciting. It's our first re-identification, and hopefully you can just about make out in the photos here. I'm sorry it's not very clear, but there's a unique marking on the dorsal fin with the white ring, or almost a complete ring, on there at the tip of the dorsal fin. So this is what we've used to identify this animal in this case. Next slide, please, Bex. This was another really interesting animal. It actually popped up originally in January of 2024 at the Isle of Man, and then it was re-identified by the Sea Trust in Pembrokeshire in southwest Wales between January and February. And then in mid-February, it popped up in St Ives Bay and also was later sighted in Newquay Bay as well. So this is our first humpback whale identification, linking these regions through the Irish Sea and down to the southwest area. So this was a really great contribution to our data set and the catalogue. Next slide, please, Bex. Towards the end of the winter last year, we had a day, or an afternoon even, when there were 3 humpback whales off Falmouth that were very active at the surface and breaching, and lots of people went out to see them. And we managed to get identification photos just about on 2 of those animals. So the top one here is Kiara, and the one at the bottom here is Kira. So these 2 animals, as far as we're aware, this was a bit of a one-off, plus the third animal as well, who we don't know who that was. They just popped up in this area pretty much for one day, and then they were gone again. So we don't really know much about them at all. Next slide again, Bex. Moving on to more recent sightings and identifications, this is Holan, who was first identified in December just gone over at the Isles of Scilly. We've had a number of confirmed re-identifications over there right up until early February, and sometimes seen in the same area as Pye. So the bottom photo here was taken from this winter, and you can see the 2 animals together there. We've got some really good drone footage of these 2 animals now from over there, and we're hoping to get them sent off for photogrammetry studies where we can get length measurements and maybe some body condition measurements. But Briar, who's been a really great contact over at the Isles of Scilly for me this winter, helping to gather data, sent some of these photos off to an expert in this, and there's a rough, it's a very rough estimate, but Pye is estimated at 11 meters long, and Holan is much smaller at around 7 meters. Next slide, please, Bex. The last animal to mention in here is Surf Rider. Again, this is actually leaning into 2025 data, strictly speaking, but because it's been so well cited, we had to include it this time. This is the animal that has been very prolific off Watergate Bay for much of the year so far. Particularly in February, very close inshore, really easy to spot and quite active at the surface, doing a lot of breaching and thin slapping as well. So this has actually been more really a great ambassador for engaging people on marine species awareness and conservation as well. And hopefully some people here tonight have been engaged by this particular animal and social media and the sightings surrounding it as well. So we've got a number of sightings of this animal now and lots of really great photo identification images, which hopefully we can begin to link up to other regions. Next slide, Bex. So what do we know so far? So in brief, a summary of what we've found so far from the photo identification work is that, well, of course, sightings have increased significantly since 2020 for a combination of reasons. It seems to be feeding behaviour that we're seeing quite commonly here. And they're using specific areas as well. So particularly like Surfrider in Watergate Bay this year, for example. We really don't know much about the age and gender breakdown. We think we're seeing quite a number of juvenile animals, but it's incredibly hard to tell whether they are male or female. We need some very specific images of some very certain parts of the animal to be sure on that. So that's something that's probably going to really be much of an unknown to us. We have links to many other areas of the UK and Ireland, as you can see from the map here, and from the larger map in the bottom corner, we also have links to 2 breeding grounds in the tropics and to a feeding ground in the Arctic as well. And we have now finally 2 animals confirmed visiting in different seasons and years as well, being pie and minstrel. Next slide again, please, Bex. So what can you do to help or get involved with this? Well, you can report wildlife sightings to Cornwall Wildlife Trust and the Environmental Records Centre. So there's some links and advice here. There's the AUX app for reporting information and data and sightings too. The AUX app is fantastic. I love it. It's really quick and easy to use for reporting sightings. You can get involved with Sequest Southwest as a volunteer surveyor as well, and there are training sessions available for that sort of thing. You can also contribute to citizen science photo ID projects. So we have the South Coast Bottlenose Dolphin Photo ID project. We've got Josh and the Risso's Dolphin ID project, which we're just about to hear of. And of course, our humpback whales here. And we hopefully have some next steps for research into the humpback whales in conjunction with the University of Exeter, doing collaborative work on behaviour, habitat studies, more on photogrammetry, and more with international photo identification work as well. I think that's all from me, Bex. I think that's the last slide, or might be the next one's the last slide. So just a few quick thank yous to everybody who contributes data towards the catalogue, and just in general as well. To Briar, who's been really helpful to me this winter, to Bex, Abby, Claire, and all the team at Cornwall Wildlife Trust for their support as well. Lindsay McNeil of the Scottish Humpback Whale Identification Project too, for all the data that they collect there and share. And to anybody else who's contributed anything to this project. There's lots and lots of people involved in the background, but thank you very much for listening. I hope that's been really interesting, and I'll hand back to you now, Bex. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. That was great. Thank you very much. Okay, right, without further ado, we shall hand over to Josh, who has been taking on a bit of the Risso's dolphin analysis, working with Duncan at Marine Discovery. Josh, are you going to try and share slides from your end?
Yeah, I will attempt to do so. Let's
sort of a bit of a wing and a prayer tonight, isn't it?
Let's find out. Right, where am I going?
Looking promising.
How's that?
Oh,
Is it there?
no.
No. Oh God, right. Here we go. We're
just getting some sort of bar turned up, or I am anyway.
You're getting a bar, right? Hang on. Oh, that bar's gone again now. Oh, for God's sake. Is it there now?
No.
No. Maybe you might have to share it then, Bex, if that's right.
It's a Microsoft Mac thing. Okay.
Oh, yeah,
right.
probably. I am on the Mac today.
Okay, I'll have a go sharing from my end then, if that's all right. So it'll
Yeah.
be the same again. So if other folks could monitor the chat, I will share my screen.
Right, cool. Yeah, lovely. That looks good mine, so I assume it's fine for everyone else as well. Yeah, so I'm Josh. I work at Marine Discovery for Hannah and Duncan, and I've been looking at the Risso's photos that we've been collecting over the last 18 years. Yeah, so next slide, please, Bex. So this is a very brief timeline of sort of the Risso's and the Southwest history and the research that's been currently been going on. So since 2007, Marine Discovery has been seeing Risso's dolphins on their trips. And we had our first match of a Risso's dolphin, which got seen in Mounts Bay to Bardsey Island in North Wales in 2009. And then this led to the sort of the creation of the first Mounts Bay Risso's dolphin catalogue with all the marine discovery data in 2010 by Marika. And this was then developed by Becca Nee, who works for us as well, in 2016. And Eleanor Kepi then has done some habitat modelling as well for Risso's dolphins using marine discovery data. And then last year in 2024, Carla Hill started coordinating all the different sightings from the southwest together. So the southwest is Cornwall, Devon, and the Isles of Scilly, because we currently have had no sightings from Dorset yet for Risso's. And I've been helping Carla go through all of that and then sort of continuing it on as she finished her masters. And we're now linking up with other organisations such as Sea Watch, the Maxwell and Dolphin Watch, and ALARC off the coast of Brittany in France to see if we can find some matches not in the southwest. Next slide, please. So yeah, I'm going to start off with some graphs. Sorry, guys. So this is this bar chart just shows the Risso's dolphins in Mounts Bay on Marine Discovery, and it's over 100-kilometre observation. So you can kind of see that we're trickling in with Risso sightings, and these are 1 or 2 sightings a year until 2014, where we had a little bump up, and then in 2015 we had a really massive spike. And that's because we had a nursery group of females and calves hanging out in the inner bit of Mounts Bay for the entire summer. And then on from that, we then had this sort of biannual, every other year rise in sightings, like Duncan was saying earlier, with another big peak in 2023. So if you go again next, please. This is the same graph, just a bit zoomed in, so you can really see this trend a bit more clearly. 2015, like I said, that big year, 2016 going down, 2017 going up, 2018 down, and so on and so forth. But it is a general over-increasing amount of Risso's dolphins being seen in Mounts Bay. Next slide again, please. So obviously they were all effort-corrected data from Marine Discovery and Penzance, but this graph here shows the entire complete number of encounters from 2007 until 2024, which has been used for the entirety of the catalogue, and there's 418 encounters used to get all the pictures for some Risso's dolphins. So you can kind of see it's the same trends in 2015 and 2023 having those 2 peaks. But it's a lot more kind of spread out because it's been using the entirety of the southwest. Next slide, please. So just kind of going in for a deeper look into this then and seeing the difference within the year. You can see here that there's a gradual increase in Risso's during the spring, and then this then peaks in July, dips right off in August, and has another little blip in September and October. And this is generally the kind of so this is just for Mounts Bay, but this is the general rule for the whole of the southwest, is that you will see more of them in June and July. And the reason for this is that July is the peak of the cuttlefish spawning, like Duncan briefly mentioned earlier. So if you go next slide for me, please, I think. Yeah, lovely. So the cuttlefish, when they're spawning inshore, and they're spawning on all the sort of seagrass and kelp forests, as it's nice places for them to hide, and they've got all the lovely things to attach their eggs to. And cuttlefish are really sensitive to depth pressure changes when they're laying their eggs. So they come in and they always lay them inshore. And you can see here, I've got a bit ahead of myself there, actually, sorry. But yeah, you can see on the map there, the darker the colour, the more likely the relative probability of seeing Risso's in that area are. And that is generally all over the seagrass and the kelp forest there inshore, but also further out to sea a little bit more, you can see there's a higher chance of seeing them around some of the more offshore slopes as well. And again, that relates into the seasonal trends in cuttlefish and other prey items that the Risso's dolphins are using. Next slide, please. So yeah, so the cuttlefish, when they come into spawn, they're really peaking in July. And what they're doing is they're laying their eggs generally on a big spring tide, because these eggs are really sensitive to pressure. So if they're on the bigger tides during the springs, they know that the depth isn't going to be too much, that their eggs can develop properly, basically. Because if they lay them to depth, the pressure's too great and the eggs won't get through to hatching. So the bar chart there just shows the amount of sightings of Risso's dolphins in relation to the moon cycles. So there obviously there's a big increase there on a waxing moon coming into a full moon, which is coming into spring tides. But you would expect to kind of see a peak in the new moon as well, but that needs some more investigation. But potentially with the full moon, there's obviously more light coming off the moon, so it might be easier for them to see both cuttlefish in the water and the Rizzo's dolphins as well. But the Rizzo's dolphins, they're feeding on the cuttlefish during this peak season in the summer, and down here in Mounts Bay and sort of the southwest, that peak for the breeding cuttlefish is in July and August. And then they are also seen in other times of the year as well. But this then means they then shift their diet, and they'll then start feeding more on liligo squid and octopus as well, more in the winter months. But then these animals will then be in different places, which is why those offshore slopes become a lot more important for species such as squid. And then once the cuttlefish stop spawning, they also have a offshore migration onto these slopes as well. So the Rizzo's dolphins follow their food source to these different locations during the year. Next slide, please. So this graph is the same one as earlier, and just showing the amount of Rizzo's dolphins over the years per 100 kilometers traveled. But the red line there is just overlaid with cuttlefish landings from grids in the southwest of Cornwall. And you can see here that there's quite a strong correlation with the amount of Rizzo sightings in the landings data as well. So again, that big landings data means there's more cuttlefish around, which peaked in 2015 and 2017 with the increase of Rizzo's dolphins as well. But we don't have the data for the landings past 2020, which is why that line ends there. Next slide, please. And yeah, these are just the ICES grids used, so Isles of Scilly and West Cornwall. That's where all the landings for the cuttlefish came in on. Obviously, there are cuttlefish being landed further east in Brixham and Devon as well, but I didn't have the data for that stuff yet. Next slide, sorry, Bex, thank you. And then using other people's data as well for the southwest, so Duncan went on about the orca data. The lighter, the blue patches are all the survey routes for the orca data, and the sort of pink and the red are the Rizzo's dolphins sightings on these routes. And you can quite clearly see that the Selonian route there from Penzance to the Isles of Scilly, that nice pink line, is quite popular for seeing Rizzo's dolphins. And then there's a few offshore in the middle of the channel, a few sightings of Rizzo's as well. And that then aligns up with the next slide, please, Bex. This is the map for overwintering grounds of cuttlefish. So once they finish spawning close into shore, they then migrate off into those deeper waters. And that dark black blob in the middle of the channel there, that's the core area for the overwintering cuttlefish. And the red dots is that orca data. So again, you can see the Selonian route there, but those other red dots for orca are overlapping with those winter feeding grounds for the cuttlefish, and the Rizzos are using that area. And the arrows then show that the migration of the cuttlefish coming not only to inshore into the south coast of England, but also off to France as well. So it's the same population in France and England for cuttlefish, which you might think that the Rizzo's dolphins go offshore to that core area in the winter, and then they can split either side to France or the UK for the summer feeding. But leading on to the next slide is the photo identification. And the photo ID is really quite cool, Rizzos, because they have all these unique markings. It's slightly different to all the other sort of dolphin and whale species. They really do look different. And the photo ID so far is showing us that we haven't got any matches of Rizzo's dolphins off of France. So even though the cuttlefish are the same stock and they're using both English and French coast, the Rizzo's dolphins at the moment, we haven't got any matches to either side of the channel yet, or the Channel Islands. Next slide, please. So there's lots of different types of markings and scarification on Rizzo's dolphins, and you can see a few of them just there. And these build up throughout their entire life. And if you take enough regular pictures of these dolphins, you can see these changes throughout their life. And a lot of these scars are embedded quite deep into their tissue, so they will remain there throughout their life. And some of them do fade, but if you do take enough photos over a short period of time, you can see these changes happening as well. And these all come from interactions with each other. Rizzo's dolphins only have teeth on the lower half on the lower jaw, so often through play and social interactions, these guys are scarring each other, but also from the beaks of cuttlefish, squid, and octopus. when they're being sucked in to get devoured by the Rizzos. So next slide, please, Bex. So here you can see the external matches out of the southwest. So the Rizzo's dolphins we get here down in Cornwall, most of our matches come from Anglesey and the Isle of Man, but also elsewhere on the north coast of Wales, and even a match from Pembrokeshire as well. So these Rizzo's dolphins that are using Cornwall are using, you know, the whole sort of western side of England and Wales, travelling up and down. And what's really cool is with the re-sightings of photo matches is that when we're seeing specific Rizzo individuals down here in Cornwall, we're seeing them when we get a lot more of them in that July and August period, not July and August, that June and July period, and then in that sort of early summer. Moving on to late summer, early autumn and early winter, those same animals in the same year being seen further north. So they're coming in to feed on the cuttlefish spawning season down here in the southwest, and then travelling up north to Anglesey sort of for August and September, when actually that's the best time to see Rizzos off of that coast, which is quite an interesting seasonal change that we're seeing. But down in the southwest, the Rizzo's dolphins are being resighted all around. So not obviously in Mounts Bay, the Isles of Scilly have matches to the mainland as well, the north coast off of Padstow, and further around to places in Devon and Falmouth as well. Next slide, please. So this is individual MDRD 45, which I've nicknamed Empress because some people prefer names, some people prefer numbers. Both are just as useful for these things. And with the Southwest catalogue, that we now have 561 profiles of Rizzo's dolphins. And when I say profiles, that does mean some of them we've been able to ID both sides of the animal. And in the southwest, we've got 95 animals that we've been able to get both sides on, like number 45 here. You can see she's quite distinctive with that sort of white saddle on her dorsal fin. So she was a nice easy one, whereas some of them are a bit more harder, especially when they're younger and they haven't quite built up all those unique markings yet. You can't match up the left and the right side. So for the southwest, we've got 210 right side profiles and 256 left side profiles. And what's really cool, though, is that through taking all these pictures, 43% of the individuals have been seen more than once. A lot of these individuals are seen over multiple times on different sightings in the same day. So when we're on the boat for Marine Discovery, we might see them in the morning and the afternoon. Or sometimes in some of them as well, they've been seen in Falmouth and Penzance in the same day. But the longest sighting in the southwest for one individual was over 12 years. And number 47 here, 45 even, number 45, she was really interesting because she was one of that mother-calf nursery group pairings that were here for the entire of 2015. So she hung around with that calf you can see in the top left for that whole summer. 2 years later in 2017, she came back, but her calf wasn't to be seen. And calves generally will stay with Rizzo's dolphins for around 3 years. So that calf either was weaned, or wasn't photographed, or it might have perished as well. But we don't know. That calf hadn't had enough markings for us to be able to re-find it yet either. But then in 2021, 45 was re-seen again off of Porcona, and you can see she's got that lovely, nice new scar on the front side there compared to 2017. So that you can see how those patterns are, they stay there for life, but they just get added to. Next slide, please. And then this is just for the Marine Discovery data, because a lot of the animals in the Southwest catalogue have been photographed in Mounts Bay. And obviously all the Mounts Bay data is effort corrected, so it's nice. You can get different results and have a bit more in depth depending on where these animals have been seen. The Becker did a resightings rate in 2015, which was 24.5%, and this one actually went down to 24% in 2024. But that's because it went up. We've got more individuals coming in, so there's less chance of them. Well, yeah, there's more individuals, so it's more dolphins to try and take pictures of, which is quite hard as they can be quite secretive sometimes. But out of all the individuals in the whole of the Southwest, there's 335 of them have only been seen in Mounts Bay, which is quite a high proportion. Yeah, next slide, please. So now I'm just going to kind of go on to the fun bit, which is all the sort of stories of these dolphins and the stories that these pictures can tell. So the picture on the left there, number 10, first got photographed on the Isle of Man, actually, and then in the following April, we've seen it off of Mounts Bay in 2015. But in the same month, in April, this animal swam all the way from Mounts Bay up to Anglesey, and has been seen in Anglesey on various years since. But you can see in Anglesey, it's mainly in that sort of late summer and winter period, but they are obviously seen off there in August and April as well. The animal on the right there, which has been nicknamed Dancer, first got seen in Mounts Bay in 2021 and the 6th of May, and it stayed in Mounts Bay for a few days and then went over to Falmouth in the June, and then a month later it was then also seen off of Padstow. So this animal travelled quite a lot of the Cornish coast, along with a couple others that were seen with it at the same time in the pod. But this one was quite a pretty one, so I thought I'd choose this one. Next slide, please. So we're now also starting to notice, because we're seeing these animals a lot more, we're starting to notice all these different behaviours associated. And we get these bachelor pods. So when you have these mother and calf group, the nursery pods, coming in, and they're spending a lot of time inshore, in these shallow waters, like Duncan was saying earlier, feeding on the cuttlefish over the seagrass, because they don't have to be away from their calves for too long. These bachelor groups, though, these individuals are being seen on different various years, but they're always together. They're never seen with any other sort of individuals. They're very closely knit groups. And the males in Rizzo's, they form really strong bonds when they're younger, and they'll have these big lad groups, and they'll go out and compete for females of each other as well. And these two here are some nice individuals that we've been seeing since 2021, and they've been seen the last 2 years down in Mounts Bay. And again, they've not been seen anywhere else apart from Mounts Bay either. But when the big male groups come in, you can always tell them, because the males are a lot whiter than the females generally. And their behaviour is very different. They're a lot more bolshy, and they've been seen sort of jumping out the water a lot more. They're a lot more active. And last year we had a really interesting observation with this group of dolphins, where they came racing over to the boat. Next slide, please, Bex. Thank you. This bachelor pod came racing over to the boat, but in there was this animal here, which is 515, and she hadn't been seen before. This individual hadn't been seen before, and not from the previous years. And she also had this different level of scarring. So we're assuming that she was actually a female, because she doesn't have the same level of scarring, and she's not been seen with this group of dolphins before either. So what we were seeing then was her basically trying to run away from these males, so she's obviously a nice fertile female, and these males were chasing her, doing a mating run basically, and she was using the boat as a bit of a cover, is what we think. But it was really interesting to watch this group of animals. So it'll be interesting if this bachelor group does come back this year, if this animal's seen again, and if it is seen again, if it has a calf, then we know she was a female, and we might know who some of the dads are. And you can just see the Rizzo's there at the bottom of the picture with the common dolphins as well. And this is another one of the suspected bachelor pod group members. And the common dolphins, like Duncan's saying, are everywhere at the moment. They are inshore, and they've become really high in numbers. But not only are the common dolphins displacing porpoises, but Rizzo's dolphins are known to bully and pester other cetacean species in the Azores, like sperm whales and pilot whales, which are a lot bigger than them. So they'll also come round and bully common dolphins out of their feeding areas as well, by looks of it. Next slide, please, Bex. So some of these animals as well, not only the bachelor pods, they've been seen together, but some of the calving nursery pods members, the females, are also seen together as well. These two individuals, I'm not sure what gender these two are, but they were quite interesting for where they've been matched. They've been seen together every time they've been seen, and they've got quite distinctive markings. 121's got that lovely corkscrew, and 123 you can see he's got the notches on the rear of the dorsal fin there. And these two were first photographed together in Mounts Bay in 2017, and then in 2021 they were both spotted off of Poles F, and then they were also a month later spotted off the Isle of Man together as well. So these guys have been travelling together, for at least 4 years, which is really interesting. Next slide, please. So yeah, we've mentioned the nursery groups quite a lot, but that's because we do see a lot of nursery, mother and calf groups, and actually calves make up to 58% of encounters in Mounts Bay. and they're using this area. So this is 47 crosshatch, again another one of the 2015 nursery pods, but she's not been seen since, whereas 2 of the other female members have been seen since, and we don't know what's happening to them. We don't know where she's gone, but she could turn up at any point because Rizzo's dolphins can live for well over 40 years, so I hope she does come back at some point. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is another example of one of those nursery pods, and you can start to see when with number 47 here, the dolphin on the left. This is her in 2015. She's got that lovely sort of line down the middle, and she's got a bit more of an older, bigger calf there in 2015, but they hung around all summer. Then in 2017, they're both back, and she's still got the same calf, but you can just about start seeing these markings coming in on the calf, so she's now identifiable. But then in 2021, number 47 was back, and by this point, her calf had been weaned, but was no longer with mum. Yeah, we don't know what happened to the calf after 2017. Next slide, please. But because these dolphins are spending more time inshore and for longer periods of time as well, and there's more of them, Rizzo's dolphins are generally quite a slow-moving species, especially in the daytimes where they're resting because they're feeding nocturnally on cuttlefish and squid. So this means they are at risk to more anthropogenic threats, such as this unfortunate individual that's got a suspected boat strike injury, and it's quite nasty. This animal was seen for 2 or 3 days in a row, looking really lethargic with these really quite raw, fresh injuries. After that, it was never spotted again, and I'm not surprised it wasn't spotted again either, because it probably perished. So as these dolphins come into the shore a lot more, it is worth recording these and where they use all these different areas, so that we can try and protect them a little bit more and not have any risks at them. So going forwards into the future, with the research of Rizzo's, keeping the catalogue updated. So this year hopefully will be a bumper year for Rizzo's, as last year was our off year. So any photos, like Dan and Duncan said, any photos or even just observations without photos, please do send them in, because we want to see where these Rizzo's are and at what time. And the more photos we get, the more matches we can make and start piecing together their lives. We also want to find some matches of Ireland. We've not had a look with Ireland yet, so it'd be great to see if these Rizzo's dolphins are crossing the Celtic Sea over to Ireland, and then collaborate more with other Rizzo researchers in the northeast of Atlantic as well, and seeing any similarities and differences within these Rizzo dolphin populations. But yeah, so thank you very much for listening. Cheers. You're muted, Bex.
Got to happen once. Thank you very much for that, Josh. Brilliant presentation. Okay, we're at our break. So if we say just a slightly short break than we would have had, because we are running a little bit, obviously we're running over because we started late and we've got enthusiastic presenters, I think, slightly as well. So if we could reconvene at 8, if that's all right with everybody, we will see you then. If anybody's got any questions, please put them in the chat and the team will be able to get to you.